Girls with Guns, The Story of Feminist Armies by Hold Off Hunger. Introduction.
One of the core tenets of modern civilization is giving more rights to women than they had been traditionally granted. There are political rights, like the right to vote and hold office, and there are economic rights, like property, inheritance, and the right to participate and excel in the workplace. Many feminist societies of the past have been based on these, as well as educational, social, and reproductive rights. At one time or another, all of these ideas were controversial. And today, in the Western world, there is still one that remains so: the right to be trained in and to hold arms in defense of society at large. That is, military rights.
Part 1. The Pre-Modern Feminist Fighters.
In ancient Greek mythology, there was a nation of legendary warrior women, possibly alive at the time of the Trojan War, circa 12th or 13th century BCE. In 1542, the Spanish explorer Francisco de Orellana went up the longest river of Brazil, and he encountered a tribe whose women did most of the fighting, according to John A. Crow, Professor Emeritus of Spanish at the University of California, Los Angeles. This is how it got the name the Amazon. If you look through history, you'll see this brave female warrior stepping out of the mists of myth and into the hard world of reality. The ancient Assyrians as well were another exceptionally ruthless unisex warrior society that conquered the Mesopotamian Valley around 1200 BCE, according to Dr. Kathy Cobb. Between the years 500 to 140 BCE, women of the Pontic Caspian steppe formed the basis of the pre-modern military. The British archaeologist and professor Barry Cunliffe wrote how the women were frequently hunting on horseback with their husbands, sometimes even unaccompanied, in war taking the field, and wearing the very same dress as their men, and that there was a law established that no girl shall wed till she has killed a man in battle. In the 1st century CE, the Romans entered British territory, and they were brutally pushed back by Queen Boudica, that bold representative of ancient Celtic culture. A contemporary historical writer tells us that the idea of a female leader was very alien to the Romans. Being defeated by one was a severe blow to their pride. In the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the 13th century book that depicted life during the Chinese Han Dynasty in the 2nd century BCE, we read of a real warrior woman with hundreds of armed fighting women guards. In it, we also read the story of how the hero, Zhuand, recalls going down his bridal chamber and how he cannot help but noticing the vast array of weapons and the women guards with their swords. In China, we find that women fought in battles as well. When the Liao Empire was attacked by the Song Dynasty in the year 986 CE, Dowager Empress Chengtian took the field in person at the head of the Khitan forces and thrice defeated the Song armies. This is according to John Key, the British historian renowned for his studies of the East, who also said that Chengtian negotiated the peace as well, in which we find an interesting requirement. Her defeated enemies were required to present her husband with a suitable birthday gift every year. Moving south of China, we find another glowing jewel of pre-modern civilization, Vietnam. In that era, China was like an all-encompassing empire, demanding that all nations recognize the Chinese ruler as the auspicious son of heaven. But when they invaded and colonized Vietnam, they were defeated by two sisters, the Trung sisters, widows of dead soldiers who had rallied the population against Chinese chauvinism and exploitation around the year 40 CE. They had distinguished themselves as intrepid warriors defending Vietnam from invasion from the north, according to William J. Dwucker, a United States Foreign Service officer and professor emeritus of East Asian Studies at Penn State University. But they had a society worth defending. Vietnamese had many of the same rights as men. They were permitted to inherit family property and had more legal rights within the family. In India, between the years 100 and 400 CE, women worked as accountants, judges, bailiffs, and guards. Some early Indian tribes were named after women, and that women fought in armies, not as an occasional Joan of Arc, but as part of the regular troops.
Part 2. The Leftist Feminist Soldiers.
The German Peasant War of 1524 was the very first of a number of social explosions that began the truly modern era of civilization. In many history books, it's a story of the common man who revolted against privileged, superstitious, cult-like authorities. But there's a problem with this interpretation. According to James M. Steyer, the historian professor emeritus at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada, who says, even the term common man needs to be widened, since women participated. more frequently in the plundering of cloisters and intimidating of priests and nuns. But he goes on to say that women would occasionally engage in military actions, such as in the defense of Gmund, or the association of Marguerite Rennerin with the campaigns of her village neighbor, Jacqueline Rohrbach. In 1850, the Taiping Rebellion exploded in China. It was a group of radical Christian revolutionaries. They distinguished themselves from other Christian groups by practicing what they preached. They treated men and women equally, they gave land to the landless, they took care of the poor, and they tended the sick. According to John Key, followers were attracted to the revolution by the important role assigned to women, including military deployment, by the pervading spirit of fraternity, and by the common ownership of resources. As many as 20 or 30 million people were killed in crushing this rebellion. Women have always been an important part of French revolutions. When a socialist democratic revolt broke out in 1848 across all of Europe, in France, the Revolutionary Women's Guard was made up of Vesuviennes, named after the volcanic Mount Vesuvius, and these too were inspired by the French Revolution of 1789 with its feminine battalions of the National Guard. According to Roger Price, who has been a lecturer of European history for 30 years at the University of Wales, the Revolution of 1848 wasn't sudden either. It was precipitated by events in 1845 to 1846, where relatively nonviolent protest was enacted. In 1847, where there was a large number of riots in the marketplaces of small market towns or industrial centers, in which participated primarily domestic weavers, with a majority of women. In 1870, constitutional Paris was defeated at the hands of absolutist Bismarck. This left a stinging feeling among the people. According to Sir Alistair Horne, Elihu Washburn, the American diplomat, was in the city at that time, and he encountered a body of several hundred exhilarated women formed up in the Place de la Concorde, ready to march upon German-occupied Versailles. Writing in his memoirs later, Washburn said he saw one old woman, 60 years of age, mounted on top of an omnibus, displaying the red flag, and she gave the word of command. How far they went and what became of them, I do not know. And then there's also the legend of the Pétrileuses, revolutionary women of France, who torched out their enemies with flames. Jules Alix, mayor of the 8th arrondissement, or district of Paris, proposed to create a legion of Amazons of the sign ready to fight. Edward S. Mason, the American economist and professor at Harvard University, gives a similar picture of the Paris Commune of 1870. Among the well-known leaders of the Commune, there is Louise Michel, the Red Virgin, who fought with the 61st Battalion and had taken part in the insurrection of January 22nd. Today, she is an iconic hero of the Anarchist movement. Another woman active in the military defense was Elizabeth Dmitrieff, who was a devoted disciple of Karl Marx, who would later write about the event famously in the Civil War in France. The women fought behind the barricades along with men and took part in the bitter hand-to-hand struggles of the streets. Allegedly, most of them were widows of communards. Madness seems to possess them. One sees them, their hair down like furies, throwing boiling oil, furniture, paving stones onto the soldiers. 850 women were arrested by monarchist forces, who were accused of fighting in the ranks of the Federals, lighting the fires, massacring the hostages. Horne agrees that women were the predominant forces organizing other women in the struggle. Elizabeth Dmitrieff was something like a ghost or a monster to social conservatives, who called her an anti-Bonapartist Red, always describing her as wearing a wide red belt and seldom without a rifle with fixed bayonet, slung from her shoulder, always in a constant amount of activity, helping with the commune ambulances, firing a rifle on the barricades, and orating. The fall of the women's battalion was a sad day. Along the Boulevard des Clichés, they fought from barricade to barricade, past the Place Blanche, past the site of some of the more sordid night haunts of modern Paris, back to the Place Pigalle, where most of them were forced to surrender. Diana Preston, the award-winning historian and writer, briefly mentions how the communists organized female as well as male militias, as well as the pyromaniacal obsessions of some of the revolutionaries. Of those who fled the revolutionary commune after the fall of Paris, 2 of them married the daughters of Karl Marx. The Vietnamese communist movement was born at a time of revolutionary change. In the district capital of Mo Khai, most of the protests against government atrocities were organized and filled by predominantly women. Ho Chi Minh, in praising women's roles in the revolution, drew upon the earlier Trung sisters, writing in a poem, "Vietnamese women forever, have sacrificed themselves for our country and our race. Women participated in the conflict in other ways non-directly. For instance, they worked as intelligence agents or transportation workers, and some also served in the village militia or anti-aircraft and bomb defusing units. In addition, many served in intelligence in the village militia or in artillery units. George K. Tanham, a consultant of the American Rand Corporation, was dispatched to solve the communist problem of Vietnam. In his investigation, he wrote about the Dan Quan, Vietnamese communist troops who were composed of both sexes and all ages who performed auxiliary military duties, as well as the Dan Quan Du Quiche, made primarily of male guerrillas. One of the Vietnamese philosophers, Phan Boi Chau, called for everyone to fight against Western imperialists, regardless of age, sex, ethnic origins, or religious preference, and according to William J. Dwicker, he was refreshingly free from gender or class prejudice, and appeared to give as much weight to the participation of women and the poor as to that of his own class of scholar patriots. Late in the war, the People's Liberation Army, led by Vo Nguyen Giap, began organizing women's detachments, fully armed battalions that fought the enemy, eventually earning the name the Long-Haired Army.
Part 3: The Anarchist Feminist Militias.
In late 1936, an English traveler crossed the border of France into Spain, just shortly after the Civil War erupted between the loyal Republican government, who were fighting with the rebel fascists who had launched a coup against the elected government. His name was George Orwell, and he nearly lost his life when fighting on the front lines in defense of the Spanish Republic. In his 1938 memoir, he describes how there were perhaps 1,000 men at the barracks, and a score or so of women. He also tells the story of other women he had met during the conflict. In one story, he tells us this: "It was rather humiliating that I had to be shown how to put on my new leather cartridge boxes by a Spanish girl, the wife of Williams, the other English militiaman. She was a gentle, dark-eyed, and intensely feminine creature, who looked as though her life work was to rock a cradle, but who, as a matter of fact, had fought bravely in the street battles of July. At this time, she was carrying a baby which was born just 10 months after the outbreak of the war, and had perhaps been begotten behind a barricade. There are fewer events more polarizing than the Spanish Civil War. On the one side, a leftist coalition of moderates, Republicans, socialists, communists, and anarchists, and on the other side, the dregs of tradition: capitalists, monarchists, imperialists, fascists, and Nazis." Dr. Maria Thomas writes about the anarchist militiana, the Spanish feminized form of militia, clad in blue overalls, who became a powerful symbol of revolution and anti-fascist resistance. The mere idea that women could wear these male clothes was mocked and ridiculed by the conservatives. After the war was victorious for the Nazis in Spain, trials began against those who defended the Republic. One such was against Maria Arredondo Escribano, a member of the anarchist CNT labor union, who, according to trial records anyway, faced the accusation of going all around the town dressed as a militia woman in her overalls, and the three sisters, the Yves de Gracia sisters, together were accused of having dressed in overalls of the militiana and served as armed guards. Among the many women of revolutionary Spain, there was Rosario Sanchez. She lost a hand on the battlefield at the age of 17. Lina Odena fought on the Andalusian front and committed suicide to avoid capture. And also Marina Ginesta y Coloma, a French-born communist, eventually turned anti-Stalinist, who stood watch on Catalan rooftops, rifle in hand. A photograph of Ginesta is iconic of the period. Besides fighting, many women took on non-combat roles as nurses, cooks, cleaning women, and sometimes administrators. Dr. Mary Nash, a historian of feminist movements in Spain, says that many of the women volunteers wanted to play the most active role possible in the struggle against fascism. Nash describes mixed conditions for the women, some regularly being propositioned for sex, others were far too busy surviving or fighting off cold and hunger to think about sex, and still others were never bothered, ultimately concluding under duress they carried out their military or auxiliary tasks with valor and distinction. The Spanish Organización de Mujeres Antifascistas Españolas, or the Organization of Spanish Anti-Fascist Women, was composed of women from all social classes and several ideologies, noting the presence of Catholic women and nuns. Many of their activities included organizing kindergartens and lunchrooms, handling refugees, visiting hospitals, factories on the fronts, providing assistance to working mothers. The position of this organization made itself clear. Since women's principal mission in life is that of procreation, she is in a sense the owner of the lives she creates, and therefore must vigorously defend all life. After the war, they assisted guerrilla efforts aimed at undermining the Spanish fascist state. In Mexico, we find the Zapatistas, a far-left libertarian army that declared war on the Mexican state in 1994. Eric R. Wolf, the famous historian of peasant revolutions, writes that among their leaders were women as well as men, coronelas as well as coronels. The army is filled by both men and women in defense of their revolution, and according to Dr. Martin Duran de Huerta, professor of journalism at Universidad del Claustro de Sor Juana, these were emotionally developed and mature women. They looked forward to the cessation of battle. In Uruguay, anarchists and syndicalists had formed the Partido por la Victoria del Pueblo with its own organized military wing called OPR-33. The U.S. National Security Agency operated a cross-border hunt for wanted OPR-33 militants, known as Operation Condor, for the hunt of 64 suspects, 22 of whom were women. In northeast Syria, there was a place called Rojava, left-wing libertarian militants who had taken over their own cities and regions, operating according to the municipalist theories of Murray Bookchin. Their leader, Abdullah Öcalan, has resided in solitary confinement for the past 2 decades, the sole prisoner on an island prison of Turkey. This radical ecological feminist revolt is widely celebrated by anarchists across the globe. According to Öcalan, if you want to see the best of human nature, then society must return to the state of the maternal society. According to journalists writing in 2015, women of Rojava and Kurdish women fighters have made a revolution for alternative life possible by sinking their teeth into it. The military consists of the YPG and the YPJ, or in English, the People's Defense Units and the Women's Defense Units, respectively. The Rojavans have declared an exclusively female fighting force will be needed to balance out the traditionally masculine-oriented militarism of armed militias. Like the Spanish anarchists, the Rojavans fight a foe comparable to the Nazis, and that foe is the Islamic State, or ISIS. The YPJ conducts independent operations and trainings. By 2015, it was estimated that as much as 50,000 women served in the YPG, and anywhere between 10,000 and 15,000 served with the YPJ. What are the images of the Rojava Revolution? Quote a publication by Autonom Media. And the answer? Dark-haired young women in black and camo uniforms, gripping AK-47s. The first autonomous women's guerrilla movements formed in 1993, followed by the Union of Free Women of Kurdistan in 1995 and Kurdistan Women's Worker Party in 1999. The women have a strongly determinate position within mixed guerrilla units. Security is provided in this anarchist society by the Asayis, or Security, which has a special armed unit for women only to deal with issues of rape and domestic violence. The Asayis must attend training before being allowed on the job. Everyone had to take courses in nonviolent conflict resolution and feminist theory before they were allowed to touch a gun. The executive offices for the Rojavan militias have a system called joint leaders and joint organizers, or co-chairs, which guarantees that women must make up some of the composition of decision-making bodies. Many of the women leaders were with the PKK, the arm of the political party of the guerrilla wing, in the mountains for a long time. In fact, the leadership of the YPG is often more like 50 to 60% women, as it recruits heavily from the leadership of the YPJ. The star in the YPJ flag contains a star, and that is a reference to the ancient Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar.
Conclusion.
The story of militarized feminism takes us from the pre-modern era to leftist radicalism and ultimately to anarchist revolution. We may very well have a peek into what the future holds for all of us. A world of armed women, reshaping society to fit their own needs, and building institutions that tend to their interests and concerns. But there are also questions left open. Why is there a profound absence of any inkling of a liberal feminism and the struggle to give women power? Why do women still remain excluded from the military role in Western society almost entirely? How is it that a liberal system of thinking, with its focus on equality and justice, is it willing to exclude half of all humanity and the rights to participate in revolutions, revolts, riots, and struggles of all kinds? The real movements advocating full participation for women have all either been pre-modern myths or modern revolutionaries. If you're looking to that future where feminism is firmly established with regards to all rights, You're not going to find it in a society that's made up of heroes of the liberals. Hey everyone, thanks for watching to the end. This was my first documentary, and I couldn't have done it without my wonderful editor, y'all hearing this. Please like and leave a comment if you want me to make more documentaries like this. It took a lot of effort, and I read a lot of books to get this far. Thank you so much. Betrayal of the Innocents, Desire, Power, and the Catholic Church in Spain by Timothy Mitchell. The Boxer Rebellion, the dramatic study of China's war on foreigners that shook the world in the summer of 1900 by Diana Preston. China, A History by John Key. Creations of Fire, Chemistry's Lively History from Alchemy to the Atomic Age by Kathy Cobb and Harold Goldwhite. The Communist Road to Power in Vietnam by William J. Dwyer. Communist Revolutionary Warfare from the Viet Minh to the Viet Cong by George K. Tanham. Celts, The History and Legacy of One of the Oldest Cultures in Europe by Martin J. Doherty. The German Peasants' War and Anabaptist Community of Goods by James M. Stayer. Europe Between the Oceans, 1900 BC to AD 1000 by Barry Cunliffe. The Epic of Latin America by John A. Crow. The Experiment of West Kurdistan, Feminism, Anti-Sectarianism, and Collectivism in the Syrian Revolution by Zahir Bahar. The Faith and the Fury, Popular Anti-Clerical Violence and Iconoclasm in Spain, 1931 to 1936 by Maria Thomas. Federación Anarquista Uruguaya, FAU, Crisis, Armed Struggle, and Dictatorship, 1967 to 1985, translated and edited by Paul Sharkey, written by Juan Carlos Machozo, Jaime Prieto, Hugo Corres, and others. The Fall of Paris, The Siege and the Commune, 1870 to 1871, by Alastair Horn. The French Second Republic, A Social History, by Roger Price. Ho Chi Minh, A Life, by William J. Dwyer. Homage to Catalonia, by George Orwell, Will Johnson, and Dogtail Books. The Paris Commune, An Episode in the History of the Socialist Movement, by Edward S. Mason. Peasant Wars of the 20th Century, by Eric R. Wolfe. The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, by Luo Guanzhong. A Small Key Can Open a Large Door, The Rojava Revolution, edited by Strangers in the Tangled Wilderness. To Dare Imagining, Rojava Revolution, by Atana Media. The Penguin History of Latin America, by Edwin Williamson. Vietnam, Nation in Revolution, by William J. Dwyer. Vietnam, Revolution and Transition, by William J. Dwyer. Who's Who in Hell, a handbook and international directory for humanists, freethinkers, naturalists, rationalists, and non-theists, edited by Warren Allen Smith. Hey, just one more time. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.